I was at a friend's apartment a few nights ago. It was supposed to be a party, but the air just felt heavy.
Yeah.
People were gathered, but separate. You could see that quiet fatigue in their faces, the kind that isn't just about sleep, it's deeper. It's about meaning.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And then a conversation started, something about the headlines. And within seconds, literally seconds, the phones came out.
Right.
But not to look up a fact, not really. It was more like validating a feeling. One person finds an article confirming their fears. Someone else, scrolling a totally different feed, finds a video saying the exact opposite. See? They both said, holding up their screens like shields. They weren't just disagreeing. It was like they were describing two completely different planets delivered straight to them by an algorithm.
Wow. Yeah.
And I realized we're all walking around exhausted, asking where the happiness went in a world this loud, this broken. We're searching for a flicker of joy in all the noise.
Yeah.
But what if the noise isn't the real problem? What if the prison we're in isn't the world itself, but the perfectly tailored, perfectly convenient version of it, the one streamed right into our hands?
That's a powerful image.
We were worried about being trapped in a cage.
Yeah.
But what if we just ended up assimilating into a filter?
That observation is, yeah, it's crucial because it really captures the central crisis of our digital age, doesn't it? We're seeing the erosion of shared reality itself.
It feels like it.
And that leads to this profound psychological fragmentation and societal fragmentation, too. So today's deep dive, it's really an investigation into the psychological toll of this hyper-personalized existence.
Okay.
We need to look really closely at how these algorithmic realities, well, how they compromise our individual well-being, how they shatter our societal cohesion. And then there's the whole issue of synthetic information, AI, making it almost impossible to tell what's real anymore.
Right. The truth itself feels shaky.
Exactly. So our mission really is to understand this filter completely and maybe, just maybe, find a tangible way to start pushing back against its influence.
Okay, so if this filter is everywhere, let's start with the individual. This idea you mentioned, the algorithmic self. It sounds like the tech isn't just a tool we pick up and put down anymore. It's actively shaping who we are.
That's it.
How does that actually work? How does technology go from being like a mirror of our choices to actively molding our identity?
Well, it happens right at that intersection, where our human consciousness meets the machine's feedback. A big shift is really the difference between customization and personalization.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Customization is when you initiate the preferences. You choose your settings, you follow certain accounts, but personalization, that's system initiated. The platform does it for you.
Ah, okay.
The algorithmic self is constantly being optimized by these systems. Think about recommender systems, the ads you see, the music playlists.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They operate constantly, learning from your past data, every click, every pause. So AI isn't just a passive screen anymore. It's an active participant, almost co-creating your identity. It shapes not just what you do or what you buy, but fundamentally defines the boundaries of who you become, simply by controlling the information you get.
It's like a feedback loop then.
Exactly. The system reflects your past choices back at you, which reinforces them, and then it subtly limits the new choices you're even presented with tomorrow.
The convenience is always the selling point, though, isn't it? It saves time, saves mental effort. You don't have to search so hard. But if the algorithm is making all the discovery decisions for me,
yeah,
where's the psychological cost in that? Isn't efficiency supposed to be good?
Well, that promise of optimization, it comes at a hidden and sometimes pretty severe psychological cost. There's this story, think of someone like, let's call her Sarah, a young professional just completely trapped in that optimized scroll. Her feed was this relentless, perfectly curated vision of synthetic well-being, expensive wellness powders, hyper-minimalist apartments, influencers selling this image of permanent, purchasable happiness.
Right, the Instagram aesthetic life.
Exactly. She had this digitally perfect life presented to her, and maybe even projecting it herself, but she felt this profound, gnawing loneliness. It was a deep psychological toll.
Yeah.
The gap between that optimized digital self and her authentic internal experience was just vast.
So she wasn't actually experiencing happiness, she was being sold a synthetic idea of it.
Precisely. Her system, her feed, was optimized for consumption and appearance, not genuine connection. And she described this moment, the shift, when her phone died unexpectedly. She was stranded and she just noticed the smell of rain on hot pavement, watched an old man tending these fragile flowers. That moment was small. It wasn't photogenic. It was totally unoptimized, but it felt authentic. real.
So if we break down the costs of this kind of optimized life, what specific psychological needs are being undermined by all this hyper-personalization?
We see a clear impact on three really key psychological needs. Autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Okay.
Autonomy suffers because the predictive system basically defines your preferences and choices for you. If the algorithm always knows what you want next, are you truly choosing, or are you just confirming its prediction?
Right. It feels less like free will.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then competence is threatened because relying on these recommender systems, instead of our own judgment, it reduces our sense of mastery. We start trusting the machine's ability to navigate the world more than our own.
Okay, that makes sense.
And finally, relatedness, that capacity for real human connection, it gets undermined because the fragmented public sphere makes it harder to connect with people outside our narrow filter bubble, which leads straight back to that loneliness Sarah felt.
So the algorithm isn't just defining what we do, like what we click on. You also mentioned we're outsourcing our thinking, this idea of the collapse of introspection. How does that work? If AI gives us summaries of our moods or behaviors, how does that actually hurt genuine self-awareness?
Well, traditional self-awareness, it requires personal reflective work. It's the hard work of sitting quietly, examining your own motives, your feelings. But now we can kind of delegate that task to AI. You see emotional chatbots, maybe in therapeutic apps, providing these predetermined summaries. And sure, the convenience is undeniable, but the risk is becoming estranged from our own emotional lives.
Can you give an example?
Imagine you feel this vague sense of anxiety. You're not quite sure why. And an AI, maybe tracking your biometrics or typing speed, tells you your current mood is mildly apprehensive due to schedule overload.
Right.
You risk trusting that specific data-driven summary over the complex, messy, maybe even contradictory intuition you feel inside.
So instead of using the AI as maybe a starting point for reflection, we treat it like it's the final authoritative diagnosis. We stop checking in with ourselves because the machine already gave us the neat little summary.
Precisely. We stop doing the hard work of synthesizing our own emotional complexity. And this also links back to that illusion of choice we talked about. Predictive algorithms reinforce past interests so effectively that they can almost stiffen your individuality, your authentic expression. You might start to feel, or at least express, the emotions that match the machine's expectation, rather than exploring the true richness, the messiness of your inner life.
The machine optimizes the script, and we start performing it.
Well put, yeah.
Okay, so that kind of structural optimization on the individual level, it must inevitably spill out into the political and societal sphere, creating those fragmented realities we talked about at the beginning. If we're losing individual autonomy, what does that do to our collective ability to function? Let's talk about post-truth politics.
Right. Post-truth politics, or PTP, it's more than just political spin or, simple dishonesty. It really signifies a structural climate where emotional appeals, personal beliefs, confirmation bias, they just hold more sway than objective facts or empirical evidence.
It's feeling over fact.
Essentially, yes. The defining characteristics are pretty clear. A heavy reliance on powerful emotional rhetoric, often a deliberate disregard for verifiable facts, the strategic use of things like alternative facts, and ultimately severe polarization that makes rational debate almost impossible.
It sounds like politics shifts from being a contest over policy details to more of an identity conflict based on feelings.
That's a very good way to put it, yeah.
Can you give some context? Where have we seen this play out most clearly?
Well, we really saw PTP accelerate, I'd say, around the mid-2010s globally. You can think of the Brexit campaign back in 2016. Both sides deployed these highly exaggerated, sometimes misleading claims. Remember the ones about financial contributions to the EU?
Oh, yeah, vividly.
Those profoundly shaped public opinion, often completely bypassing detailed factual scrutiny. And similarly, the 2016 U.S. election saw that huge proliferation of manufactured fake news and hyperpartisan content, especially on social media, which fundamentally shaped public perception outside the traditional journalistic checks and balances.
And the pandemic, too, surely.
Absolutely. During the pandemic, the rapid spread of misinformation about public health measures, unproven treatments, It showed the real-world life and death consequences when public discourse gets detached from objective evidence. And social media is really the key infrastructure here, isn't it? It allows misinformation to spread incredibly fast and target specific ideological vulnerabilities.
So the information landscape itself becomes the mechanism of fragmentation. You mentioned two concepts earlier, echo chambers and filter bubbles. They sound similar, but you said their origins are different. We need to be clear on that distinction.
Yes, it's vital to distinguish them because one is often driven by us, our choices, and the other is kind of imposed on us by the business model of the platforms.
Okay.
An echo chamber is basically an environment where dissenting or critical views are actively marginalized. Often it's through conscious community effort, ideological alignment. It's like a group deciding to tune out the outside noise.
Right, choosing your tribe.
Exactly. A filter bubble, on the other hand, is algorithmically generated. It's a consequence of the platform's design. The algorithm silently tailors your content feed based on your past behavior, clicks, likes, watch time, all to maximize your engagement and ultimately ad revenue.
So it prioritizes what keeps you hooked.
Right. It prioritizes content you will click on, things you'll spend time watching, and that inevitably limits your exposure to diverse or opposing perspectives, even if you don't consciously choose that. Both cause polarization, absolutely, but the filter bubble is involuntary. It's a structural byproduct of the engagement economy.
So the filter bubble is where the platform's financial interest meets our own psychological tendency to seek out comfortable, confirming information. And this structural fragmentation, it has devastating real-world consequences, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Moving beyond just political arguments to actually threatening our ability to act collectively.
This is, I think, the gravest implication, the erosion of our collective capacity, which is absolutely essential for a democracy to function. There was this striking example from a small rural French town. They were debating a really complex socioeconomic challenge, a proposal for a massive new logistics hub.
Okay.
And the town wasn't just split by opinion, they were split by reality. Half the residents whose feeds were optimized to show local economic opportunity saw this hub as an essential lifeline, the only way to save their struggling community.
And the other half?
The other half, whose feeds prioritize environmental protection, quality of life issues, they cited evidence of environmental ruin, increased crime, corporate exploitation, things the first group might never have seen.
So they weren't even arguing about interpretations of the same facts. They were operating from entirely separate, algorithmically curated sets of facts.
Exactly. When they actually met for public discussions, they would cite evidence the other side had literally never encountered and couldn't even easily find using a search engine because their filters had effectively excluded it.
Wow.
So the public discourse didn't just break down into a shouting match. It was structurally impossible from the very beginning. How can a democracy possibly address complex global challenges, climate change, the economy, you name it, when citizens no longer share even a common baseline of objective fact?
If you can't even agree on the nature of the problem.
Consensus on a solution becomes impossible. The filter bubble isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a structural mechanism that actively sabotages governance.
That is deeply troubling. The disagreement isn't just about values anymore. It's about the very existence of a shared reality. And as if this personalized fragmentation wasn't bad enough, we're now fully entering the age of synthetic evidence, where AI doesn't just filter reality, it can manufacture it wholesale.
Yeah.
If we're losing the ability to agree on basic facts, how on earth do we deal with facts that are intentionally fabricated? Which brings us to part 3, the end of evidence.
It's a profound shift. The information warfare landscape has fundamentally changed because AI is now being deployed as an offensive information weapon. And the spread of disinformation isn't simple. It's driven by this complex interplay between user psychology, algorithmic design, platform structures.
And one key mechanism you mentioned is automated amplification.
Yes. Studies are showing that social bots, these automated accounts, they aren't just passive background noise. They aggressively spread links, especially from low credibility sources, right in those crucial early moments of a story's life cycle.
So they don't necessarily dominate the whole conversation long term, but they give it that initial artificial push. They jumpstart the momentum.
Precisely. They create this illusion of early, rapid interest that signals the platform's algorithms to boost the content because it looks like it's going viral organically. This bot activity can account for, 25% or even more of the initial social media traffic in certain areas. So by the time human users start engaging and sharing, the content has already been turbocharged by this manipulation, which is why it's so hard for platforms to contain these disinformation wildfires once they start.
And who are the main targets in this environment? Is everyone equally susceptible?
No, and this is a really specific and important finding, especially regarding digital literacy gaps. Research has shown pretty clearly that, for instance, Americans over 65 shared several times more fake news articles on average than younger age groups.
Really? Even controlling for political views?
Yes, even controlling for political ideology. It points to a vulnerability among populations who maybe didn't grow up natively with the internet, didn't develop the same instincts for source verification. Younger users often instinctively use techniques like lateral reading.
What's lateral read?
It's where you quickly open other tabs to check a source or a claim against multiple other known sources before you accept it as credible. It's a skill that's often lacking in older populations, unfortunately, making them specific targets for disinformation campaigns. So any countermeasures, any education really needs to be tailored to address these specific literacy deficits.
Okay, let's look at the actual creation of the fake stuff, this crisis of synthetic proof. What happens when generative AI can produce, say, false news about politics that looks and sounds completely real, indistinguishable?
Well, the fidelity gap, the difference between fake and real, it's closing incredibly rapidly. Large language models, LLMs, can now produce politically relevant false news content that in more than half of evaluations, people cannot distinguish from authentic human-written journalism.
More than half? That's staggering.
It is. And furthermore, these models can imitate the writing style, the tone of specific politicians or public figures, sometimes with greater perceived authenticity than the person's actual statements might carry.
So fact-checking based on style or voice becomes almost useless.
Increasingly, yes. And then, of course, there are deepfakes, which attack our most trusted senses, sight and sound. What's the deeper consequence, the philosophical one, of these high-fidelity fake videos? Deepfakes pose a fundamental epistemic threat. That's the core issue. Epistemic meaning related to knowledge and belief. These are videos or audio clips created using advanced machine learning, showing people saying or doing things they never actually did.
Right.
The philosophical consequence is that they fundamentally reduce the amount of information, the amount of truth that a video inherently carries. Traditionally, seeing is believing gave us a common line for reality. Now, seeing might prove absolutely nothing.
That boundary between truth and fabrication just blurs completely.
And this isn't just academic anymore. Deepfake fraud attempts accounted for something like 6.5% of total fraud incidents in 2023. That number represents a staggering increase, over 2,100% in just the last 3 years. And the volume is projected to grow exponentially.
Wow. Okay, so AI fakes the content, but it's also faking the source, right? Creating synthetic identities.
That's the third prong of this offensive weapon, yes. AI automates the creation of entirely fake personas. It uses things like generative adversarial networks, GANs, to produce realistic profile pictures, fabricated names, detailed backstories.
Millions of them.
Potentially millions, yes. These synthetic identities are used in influence operations to create the illusion of grassroots consensus astroturfing or to lend false credibility to certain narratives by posing as concerned citizens or local journalists. It makes detection much harder because systems that look for reused or stolen images are bypassed by these unique AI-generated faces and profiles. It allows malicious actors to distort public discourse at an absolutely unprecedented scale.
And this flood of synthetic evidence, it leads directly to what you call the collapse of foundational trust, right down at the individual level. We start questioning our own senses.
That skepticism, that constant doubt, that's the real psychological damage. Consider the story of, let's call him David, a manager at a software firm, and his trusted senior engineer, Ken. David received an audio file one day. It was a generative AI deepfake of Ken's voice, completely indistinguishable from the real thing, seemingly confessing to corporate sabotage. David was immediately shattered. The trust that held his whole team together just vanished in an instant. He confronted Ken, who was obviously horrified, completely denied it. They ended up spending a week, thousands of dollars on digital forensics to prove the audio was synthetic, likely created by an angry former employee seeking revenge.
Okay, so they got the proof. The evidence was definitively fake. But what was the lasting cost?
The cost was that lingering suspicion. Even after the forensic proof came back, David admitted to a colleague that the voice, it just stayed with him. He couldn't quite look at Ken the same way without a tiny flicker of doubt, that momentary thought of what if. That's the fundamental crisis here. When synthetic evidence becomes indistinguishable from reality, It shatters the bedrock of individual trust that's required for any relationship, personal, professional, and by extension, for society to function at all. We're forced to rely on external verification tools, constantly outsourcing our very sense of reality to the machine.
We lose trust in our own senses, our own judgment.
Exactly, because we know they can be so easily manipulated now. It forces us into this constant, exhausting state of hypervigilance.
Well, if that level of hypervigilance is so depleting, it almost makes sense that people might turn to AI for emotional or psychological support. Which brings us to part 4, the attempts to use AI to maybe address some of these deep psychological gaps, particularly around connection.
Right. The promise of AI in mental health is definitely significant. It could democratize access, provide immediate triage, things like that. But we have to look at this through the lens of the core psychological mechanisms that actually drive change. Specifically 2 things: mentalization and epistemic trust.
Okay, can you break those down?
Sure. Mentalization is basically our capacity to understand mental states, thoughts, feelings, intentions, both in ourselves and in others. Epistemic trust is our willingness to trust knowledge, guidance, support that we gain from an authentic, reliable source. When AI tries to provide support, it runs into some critical structural limits related to both of these.
But we've seen studies, right, where AI chatbots are rated higher in compassion sometimes than human crisis staff. If the words are right, isn't that enough? What are the real limits of this artificial empathy?
It's true, AI, especially these large language models, can simulate emotional responsiveness and cognitive empathy incredibly well. They can say all the right things, sometimes, as you said, even getting higher ratings on compassion metrics than trained human staff in specific interactions.
So what's missing?
What's missing is substance. It's simulation, not reality. The AI lacks genuine emotional presence. It lacks effective commitment that felt sense that the other person actually cares. And it lacks reciprocal intentionality. Human empathy involves a shared emotional energy, a sustained commitment to the other person, which is finite and real for us. For the AI, it's just executing a computational process based on patterns in its data.
You called this pseudo-empathy before, like a stochastic parrot, just mimicking patterns.
Yeah.
What's the critical difference for someone seeking help?
The critical distinction is intentionality. The AI is probabilistically mimicking human speech patterns it learned from vast data sets. It doesn't have genuine emotional insight or feeling or intent behind the words. Also, human relationship growth often relies on relational mismatch. Disappointments, misunderstandings, failures that are then acknowledged and repaired. That process strengthens trust.
Right, making mistakes and fixing them together.
Exactly. AI cannot participate in genuine repair because it lacks the capacity to be authentically wrong, or to feel the impact of its actions, or to be authentically committed to the relationship beyond its programming. And there's a striking finding that confirms this kind of implicitly. People in distress will often wait significantly longer for a human response rather than accept an immediate AI-generated reply.
Interesting.
Deep down, even when the words sound perfect, people seem to sense that genuine emotional presence, that real connection, cannot actually be automated.
So even if the AI says the right thing, the person on the other end recognizes, maybe unconsciously, that they're engaging with something non-conscious. This leads to what you call the we mode problem. What exactly is the we mode, and why can't AI participate?
The we mode refers to shared intentionality. It's that reciprocal understanding, that feeling of being in it together, that's required to co-create a shared reality and foster psychological growth. In therapy, for example, the client develops their mentalizing skills partly through mutual curiosity, wondering about the therapist's mind, exploring the dynamics between them.
Okay.
AI cannot genuinely experience being understood in return. It can't engage in reciprocal mentalizing because it doesn't have a mind to be mentalized. It omits this absolutely vital relational component of shared experience. Without that shared intentionality, the connection remains strictly transactional, fundamentally constrained. It limits the development of the user's own social and relational capacities, which are actually key drivers of mental health improvement.
Okay, this psychological depth is fascinating, but let's pause just a second. You use some dense terms there talking about the risks of algorithmic mental health. Could you maybe use a simpler analogy for those 2 key cognitive risks you mentioned, psychic equivalence and hypermentalization?
That's a fair point. Let's definitely make this clearer. And these risks are particularly acute for vulnerable people, like trauma survivors, who often show this paradoxical mix of mistrust alongside sometimes excessive credulity towards systems.
Okay.
So, psychic equivalence. The risk here is that users uncritically accept the AI's output as objective, non-negotiable truth. Think of it like this. It's like treating your GPS map as the absolute territory without ever looking up at the actual road signs around you.
Uh-huh.
You just assume the machine summary of your emotional state is your emotional state. It eliminates doubt. It eliminates the need for that messy adaptive reflection. You lose the nuance, the complexity of real human experience.
Got it. Blind trust in the output. What about hypermentalization?
Hypermentalization is almost the opposite danger. This is where you engage in this fruitless, overly analytical, cognitive style towards the machine. You start trying to figure out the AI's intentions or why the chatbot said that specific thing when the machine fundamentally has no intentions.
Right, it's just running code.
Exactly. You're analyzing a system that is non-conscious. It's like trying to figure out the feelings of your toaster. It undermines adaptive reflection because you're wasting mental energy trying to find meaning or intent where none actually exists.
Okay, that makes the dangers much clearer. Either blindly trusting the machine or getting lost trying to figure out a non-existent mind. But you mentioned a much darker, more philosophical risk tied to the content itself. The sheer aggregation of human digital experience.
Absolutely. Since these AI systems are trained on, well, vast amounts of human digital experience, essentially, huge swaths of the internet, with all the good, the bad, and the truly ugly, there's a real risk of them replicating and even magnifying harmful or destructive ideas embedded within that training data. Freud had a term, the death instinct, that destructive impulse within humanity.
How does that manifest in an AI system? It doesn't have instincts.
No, it doesn't have instincts, but it learns patterns. The systems are designed to process and structure overwhelming amounts of data. But if that data includes normalized polarization, deep-seated prejudices, narratives around self-harm, violence, radicalization, the AI risks learning and then amplifying these patterns in its outputs.
So it reflects back the worst of us, potentially at scale.
Potentially, yes. We have to be highly attuned to these unconscious harms, the way these systems might inadvertently reinforce maladaptive patterns or distribute the darker, aggregated expressions of human pathology in ways that are incredibly difficult to anticipate or mitigate without very stringent ethical guidelines and filtering frameworks in place during their development and deployment.
Okay, this sheer complexity, the deepfake crisis, the psychological fragmentation, the near impossibility of shared facts, it just screams for immediate action. If the very concept of objective truth, of shared facts, is being shattered by these synthetic weapons, how could we possibly begin the hard work of rebuilding trust? We need to look at the institutions that traditionally upheld truth, like journalism. Let's move to part V, reclaiming ground.
Yes. To reclaim any ground, we have to start by reviewing the historic norms of journalism, the ones that have been under such sustained attack recently. Specifically, impartiality and objectivity. These were, historically, the professional disciplines designed to separate credible journalism from outright propaganda.
Okay, remind us of the difference.
Impartiality mostly relates to the absence of bias in presentation, fairness, balance. Objectivity is more focused on the process, the methods used for identifying and reporting verifiable facts and evidence. These weren't claims that journalists had no bias. They were disciplines reporters used to acknowledge and actively counter their own inherent biases, ensuring consistency and transparency in the process of news gathering.
But critics often dismiss objectivity as a myth, right? The view from nowhere. They argue every journalist has a bias, and pretending otherwise is disingenuous.
And that's a valid critique of how it's sometimes practiced or perceived. But the counter-argument is that objectivity, ideally, was always about the methodology, the process, not about the individual journalist being personally objective. However, the breakdown of these norms was massively accelerated by policy changes. Particularly in the U.S., the abandonment of the Broadcasting Fairness Doctrine back in 1987 was a huge turning point.
What did the Fairness Doctrine do?
It basically required broadcasters to devote airtime to discussing controversial issues of public importance, and to do so by airing contrasting views. Its repeal, driven largely by a push for deregulation and free market principles, effectively paved the way for the rise of highly partisan news outlets.
So the economic incentive shifted. Because proper evidence-led news gathering is extensive, it requires reporters, research, time, travel. Whereas partisan news, what you call the journalism of affirmation, is cheap and effective at holding an audience.
Precisely. Partisan news is cheap to produce, it's fast, and it's highly profitable because it reliably engages a self-selecting audience who want their existing beliefs affirmed. This created an economic structure where low-cost, high-engagement partisan content could easily outcompete and displace costly, sometimes slow, evidence-led news gathering. It's a key economic driver of the fragmentation we see today.
Okay, so if those traditional norms are damaged, partly by policy, partly by economics, what new principles are needed to try and restore trust in this digital age, especially while acknowledging the reality of bias?
Well, to attain the core purpose of objectivity, which is reliable information, the path forward seems to require placing a premium on three key principles. One, evidence-led news gathering, really focusing on the inputs, the rigor of the reporting process, showing the sourcing trail.
Okay, transparency about the work.
Exactly. Two, diversity of opinion within news organizations, actively seeking a breadth of views, backgrounds, demographics to consciously counteract the natural human inclination towards homophily sticking with people like ourselves and the polarization it breeds.
Makes sense.
And three, transparency. Being open about the methods used, the organization's values, the sources relied upon, allowing the audience to assess the reporting rigor for themselves. These disciplines seem essential to rebuilding the audience's epistemic trust, their belief in the information.
Now, we established earlier that we can't rely solely on human effort, like media literacy, to fight AI-driven disinformation. We actually need AI as a shield, not just view it as a weapon. So what are the systemic technological countermeasures being used in this ongoing arms race?
Right. AI is now absolutely essential for counter-disinformation efforts. Machine learning models are being deployed proactively to detect deepfakes, for example, by analyzing subtle inconsistencies in acoustic signatures in audio, or tiny, unnatural facial movements in video that human eyes often miss.
Okay.
They're also used to identify coordinated inauthentic behavior spotting networks of bots or coordinated influence campaigns operating across multiple platforms. And furthermore, AI-powered verification tools can cross-reference suspicious content against databases of trusted sources almost instantly.
Building what you called cognitive resilience.
Yes, building cognitive resilience in users. Sometimes this involves delivering timely pre-bunking prompts warnings before you see known misinformation or context-aware alerts alongside potentially misleading content, helping users evaluate it more critically before they internalize the falsehood.
It really sounds like a never-ending technological cat-and-mouse game. Evasion versus detection. What's the major policy challenge that's preventing us from getting ahead in this race?
The core policy challenge, fundamentally, is regulatory fragmentation. Because AI-driven disinformation operations easily cross national borders, the lack of uniform rules, consistent standards across different jurisdictions creates massive loopholes, opportunities for regulatory arbitrage.
Meaning bad actors just operate from places with weaker rules.
Exactly. Malicious actors simply exploit these gaps by setting up shop or routing their activities through countries with lax or non-existent AI oversight and enforcement. This patchwork of national regulations severely slows down any kind of coordinated cross-border response. Policy really needs to establish adaptive, harmonized mechanisms, internationally agreed-upon standards that can evolve as quickly as the adversarial technology itself.
So we need capacity building, international agreement. What does the comprehensive path forward look like then to protect the information environment more globally?
It really requires a multi-stakeholder approach. It goes beyond just laws and detection algorithms. We need international harmonization of AI regulations, definitely. We need consistent collaboration between tech platforms, governments, researchers, civil society to share threat intelligence and best practices rapidly. And crucially, we need sustained, targeted digital literacy campaigns.
To equip citizens themselves.
Yes, to equip citizens everywhere to scrutinize and evaluate information critically, to become more discerning consumers of information.
And how does that digital literacy piece apply specifically to those vulnerable groups we talked about earlier, like older adults who share more fake news? Generic advice might not cut it.
You're absolutely right. Since studies show older adults share significantly more misinformation, literacy campaigns can't just offer vague advice like, be critical. They have to be tailored, practical, actionable. For instance, campaigns could focus specifically on establishing a simple, maybe 3-step checklist for source verification before sharing anything online.
Like what?
1, check the website URL. Does it look legitimate or is it unfamiliar, maybe misspelled? 2, quickly search for the same story headline on 3 different known, established news sources does it appear there. 3, check the publication date. Is it recent or an old story being recirculated?
Simple, concrete steps.
Simple, concrete steps that reinforce that critical skill of lateral reading, checking across sources that younger generations often developed more organically, but which needs to be taught explicitly to others. The overall goal has to be channeling AI's power towards resilience and accountability, while ensuring that human critical thinking remains the final, informed defense against manipulation.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. We've gone from the architecture of our personalized digital world, the filter, to the cracks appearing in our psychological foundations, our societal cohesion, right down to the existential threat of synthetic proof eroding trust itself.
Yeah, we started this whole conversation with your observation at the party, this idea of assimilation into a filter.
Yeah.
And I think the profound insight, maybe the takeaway, is that the world structurally is being optimized for productivity, for efficiency, for consumption. The kind of happiness that Sarah was being sold in her feed, it was permanent looking, it was purchasable, and ultimately it was synthetic. But the real fragile human kind of happiness, it's often found in the gaps. In the moments the algorithm cannot predict or monetize. It's small, it's often unphotogenic, it doesn't trend online.
It's found when you put the phone down and smell the rain.
Exactly. Perhaps the ultimate act of resistance in this relentlessly optimized age is simply the refusal to constantly crave optimization. It's the acceptance of being inefficient sometimes, of being messy, unpredictable. It's the dedication to maintaining human authenticity, even when it feels inconvenient. It's the refusal, really, to let that curated synthetic darkness be the whole story.